Hey everyone, and welcome back to Exposed Scandalous Files of the Elite. I'm your host, Jim Chapman, and today I'm bringing you another episode after a little hiatus, if you will, of bad teachers. And today we're going to talk about several teachers. I'm going to call it a trifecta. Teachers who have made headlines in 2025 for relationships with students. And of course, we are wrapping up 2025, so this will be the last bad teachers episode you'll hear this year. And these would be some of the more attention-grabbing teacher-student relationship cases throughout this past year. And we're going to start with Nicole Baird, who is a 30-year-old former art teacher at Wichita North High School. And this is in Sedgwick County, Kansas. Now, she is facing charges for felony counts of unlawful sexual relations with a student. These allegations involve grooming and sexually exploiting the male student who she met in middle school, with the relationship escalating to sexual acts during his senior year of high school in early 2024. Now, Baird, who is married, was even once named Teacher of the Month. That was in January of 2020 when she was at what's known as Mayberry Magnet Middle School. That's right, Mayberry. You can't make that shit up. And it's at that school where she used her position to initially isolate and manipulate this student. Now, the case came to light about a year after the student's graduation from high school, and that led to her arrest in May of this year. So we're going to get into it, and it all starts with the affidavit, right? Which I actually have in front of me. So I'll be able to quote the actual facts of this case. This was filed June 2nd of 2025, and it reads, on May 21st of 2025, you're a Fayette. And y'all, anytime I say a Fayette, that is the person who is filing for the affidavit. And in almost all cases, that's the detective for the police department seeking it from a judge. So it reads, your Fayette is a detective with the Wichita Police Department assigned to the Exploited and Missing Child Unit, and in that capacity assisted in Wichita Police Department case, and it gives a case number. The offense described occurred within the confines of Sedgwick County, Kansas, between January 1st of 2024 and May 13th of 2024. Then it goes into the facts or alleged facts as the Fayette learned those. On May 19th of 2025, your Fayette was assigned to investigate a tip later documented, and he gives the documentation number, where an educator with the name of Miss Baird had an inappropriate relationship with a former student. The original social media post was through Instagram. Sergeant Hall was provided a copy of the post from Dale Mattern, who is a security supervisor. Mattern later provided information regarding both the teacher and student. Mattern identified the victim as FSJ. Of course, they're not going to say his name. And he was 18 years old when he was identified. He identified the teacher as Nicole M. Baird, who is 30 years old. Her maiden name was Nicole Hernandez. There was no clear indication when or where the offense would have occurred. Mattern later advised Baird, who currently teaches at North High School and previously taught at Mayberry Middle School. On May 21st of 2025, your Fayette interviewed FSJ at the Child Advocacy Center of Sedgwick County. FSJ said Baird was his art teacher at Mayberry Middle School and then later during his sophomore, junior, and senior years at North High School. FSJ described being groomed or manipulated by Baird throughout his sophomore, junior, and senior years. In summary, he described how she befriended him, then isolated him from others. She would invite him to her classroom before and after school when no one else was present, and in his junior year, Baird initiated physical contact with FSJ. FSJ described how the contact started as Baird touching or rubbing his back and shoulders while they were alone. She later asked and made him give her hugs. Baird gave, and I'm just going to refer to him as Victim from here on out, Victim her personal cell number. The two began communicating a lot through Messenger. The victim said their conversations were initially about school and only a little about personal topics. However, as the year progressed, they texted less about school and more about personal. Baird messaged him every day about how her marriage was struggling. The two spent a lot of time together during the school day, and after the final bell, they were often alone in her classroom. When victim's high school tennis team needed another coach, Baird volunteered. That meant spending more time together. The two continued to text each other over the summer of the victim's junior year. The victim described how his relationship with Baird continued to progress into his senior year. The victim spent half of his lunches with Baird when she conducted hall duty. He described how she changed her assigned hall duty location to a more isolated area of the school. They spent time alone after the final bell. They were often alone in her office. He described how Baird would often ask him for hugs. The two began exchanging handwritten notes. Baird started complimenting the victim often. And what's she doing here, y'all? She is grooming, right? Around halfway through his senior year, Baird asked him to go to Mark Arts, which is an art supply store, to pick up some frames. The victim asked Baird to ask his mom for permission, which his mother gave. They took Baird's vehicle, which the victim described as a white Jeep SUV. When they got back to North High School, she asked him to stay and talk to her while they sat in her Jeep. At one point, she reached over and held the victim's hand. The victim described a different time that Baird took him to Wichita Art Museum to see an event. She got permission from his mother. At the museum, Baird and the victim sat down to talk. Baird was very close as she sat next to the victim. Their thighs would touch. The next day, Baird wrote a thank you note to the victim for going with her to the museum. She also wrote his mother a thank you note for allowing him to go. The victim described how the physical contact between him and Baird continued to progress during his senior year. He described how Baird started kissing his neck slightly when they hugged. He described a specific time Baird was out with her friends and texted him afterwards. She asked him to meet. He met Baird in the area of 13th and Abdomen, which is a street apparently in the area. They talked for a while. She asked him for a hug. He leaned in and gave her a hug, and she kissed his neck. Baird kept asking him if he wanted to kiss her. He said he was nervous and eventually said yes. The two kissed for 1 to 2 hours before they left and went their separate ways. At school the next day, Baird told the victim he could not tell anyone and to act normal. She made him promise. At what the victim described as halfway through his senior year, or sometime after January 1st of 2024, there was an incident that happened in the school office. The two were alone. Baird kissed the victim and touched his leg with her hand. She then grabbed his penis with her hand on top of his clothes. Toward the end of the victim's senior year, there was an art show. It was on May 3rd of 2024 at the Wichita Art Museum. After the show, the victim asked Baird to meet him at his car so he could give her an end-of-year teacher gift. After receiving the gift, Baird asked the victim to hang out for a while. They were in his car and they drove a short distance from the venue. The two talked and kissed. Baird asked the victim if he wanted to touch her body. The victim touched Baird's vagina with his hand. He touched her vagina again under her clothing and described how his hands and fingers went inside of her vagina. Baird touched the victim's penis under his clothing with her hand. Afterward, they both went their separate ways. The victim described a different time something happened in Baird's office. He said it happened his last week of school. Baird invited him to her office. The two kissed. The victim touched Baird's vagina under her clothing with his hand. He described how his hands and fingers went inside her. He said Baird continued to kiss him as he touched her. She said things to encourage him to continue touching her. The victim said the same or very similar thing happened 2 or 3 times the same week. Each were in her office. The victim described an incident that occurred the night of his graduation on May 13th of 2024. After the graduation, Baird wanted him to meet her somewhere, and they met in a random neighborhood in Kansas. This time, Baird asked the victim to get in the back seat of her Jeep. The victim described there was a child seat in the back passenger seat. Baird climbed on top of the victim as he sat. Baird asked if he wanted to have sex. The victim said he was nervous and felt pressured, but said yes. Baird took the victim's pants off. She took her underwear off and rolled her dress up out of the way. The victim said they had sex. He described sex as his penis going into Baird's vagina. Baird said some things to encourage the victim. She said things similar to, "It's okay," and said they wouldn't get in trouble because he's graduated. After they had sex, they sat in the car a little while, and Baird said she was supposed to be at a bar with some of her friends. She pulled out a bottle of alcohol from under the seat. She offered some to the victim, but he told her no. During the last couple of weeks of 2023-2024 school year, the victim, who is his senior, did not have to be at school, but school was still in session. The victim described how there were multiple times he met up with Baird in the neighborhood near the school. He said they met 3 or 4 times each week and they had sex in the back seat of her Jeep. He described sex in the same manner as above, his penis in her vagina. After the school year ended, the two continued to have in-person contact. There were other times the two had sex. There were times Baird would send him nude photos of herself. He said he saved some of the photos, knowing he could use those as evidence on what she did. The victim said he also had some handwritten letters Baird wrote him. He saved some of the messages, voicemails, and other evidence on his phone. The victim later shared the items with Eurofayet, who took them into evidence. At one point, the victim understood the relationship he had with Baird was inappropriate and said he had been manipulated by Baird. He stopped communicating with her around October of 2024. He said there was more than one time Baird came to his place of work after that. He said there was one time she put candy on his car unannounced while it was parked in his driveway. The victim later disclosed what happened to his current girlfriend, mother, and father. He detailed outcry that happened on May 18th of 2025. On May 21st of 2025, Eurofayet reviewed the items shared by the victim through evidence and items he physically turned over. Eurofayet located 8 photographs of whom the victim stated was Nicole Baird. She was in states of undressed and her breasts were exposed. Most of the photos showed her face. Eurofayet compared a recent driver's license photo of Nicole M. Hernandez Baird to the female in the photos and determined they were the same. The photos were labeled with dates ranging from 7/7 of 2024 to 9/1 of 2024. Eurofayet received handwritten notes the victim said were from Baird. Eurofayet noted some of the letters made it clear the victim was a student at the time they were written. The tone of the letters indicated the writer had romantic feelings toward the victim, but there was no overt sexual content. As an example, one letter said, quote, "I hope and pray one day I get a chance to be with you," and quote, "I know that I love you." That letter was signed "Forever Yours, Owl City," and the victim stated Owl City was a code name Baird would use so others would not know the victim was talking to her. She was listed as Owl City in his phone and on social media. Eurofayet reviewed ring camera footage dated October 31st of 2024. The victim stated the clip showed Baird at his house the night she put candy on his car. The person in the video fit the description of Baird. However, the quality was too poor to positively identify the person. On May 22nd, 2025, Nicole M. Baird was arrested on probable cause and transported to EMCU, where she invoked Fifth Amendment privilege. On May 22nd, Eurofayet spoke with the principal at North High School in an audio recorded phone call, and Murray, who is the principal, said there was prior concern brought by another teacher during the 2023-2024 school year. The concern was Baird had too close of a relationship with the victim. The victim spent time with Baird during lunch. The victim walked Baird to her car. The concerns were handled internally by another school administrator. Murray said the current condition was reported to her on May 19th of 2025, and she spoke with Baird about the concern the same day. Murray later sent Eurofayette a typed dialogue from her conversation with Baird. Eurofayette reviewed the typed dialogue and learned Baird admitted to Murray that she got too close to the victim and crossed boundaries. Baird indicated it was just an emotional relationship that started after he graduated and later told Murray it started in early May of 2024 when the seniors were still in school. On May 23rd of 2025, Eurofayette executed a search warrant on the Baird's white Jeep Cherokee, and measurements were taken by crime scene investigators. Eurofayette noted the presence of tennis gear and a tennis coach guidebook. There was a child's car seat in the rear passenger seat, just as the victim described, and there was a receipt from a business the victim worked at, dated from March 8th of 2025. Nicole Baird and the victim have never been married. She was a teacher at North High School for his sophomore, junior, and senior years, and the offenses described above occurred during the second half of his senior year when he was 17 years old, and then that is signed by the affiant/officer. So quickly on this one, we're just going to cover the timeline again because it's really important to this case. Now, prior to 2020, Baird met that victim. She was teaching at Mayberry Middle School, as I said, and she was recognized as Teacher of the Month while she was there. And both the victim and the teacher eventually transitioned to Wichita North High School. Now, in this victim's sophomore year, approximately 2021, 2022, that's when the grooming started, and it started to escalate. The student started isolating himself from his peers, and she, the teacher, would start physical contact, like rubbing his back and shoulders, and remember, he said she would forcibly hug him, allegedly. Then in his senior year, which is in 2024, the relationship escalated even further. I told you about all those details, him kissing her neck. Eventually, all that led to numerous sexual encounters in the backseat of her Jeep up to 4 times a week while school was in session for non-seniors. She was sending him handwritten love letters, nude photos. And then on graduation night, that's when she initiated sex with him and told him not to worry about it, that he wasn't going to get in trouble, that he had already graduated from high school. And remember, she had the alcohol under the seat. She offered it to him and he refused. And then it was after graduation that he basically said he wanted to stop all this, and she starts delivering candy and shit to his house. And then she's arrested on May 22nd of 2025. Now, at that point, she makes her first court appearance and she posts a $50,000 bond. She gets released. She gets placed on paid administrative leave from the school pending an investigation. And like every case, a probable cause hearing takes place. This was on December 2nd of 2025, where the judge rules that there's probable cause, there's enough evidence to warrant proceeding with a trial on all 4 counts of unlawful sexual relations with a student aged 16 to 18. And it's worth mentioning the victim was 17 at the time of the sexual acts. And that's important because 16 is the age of consent in Kansas. However, as it is in a lot of states, folks, and I've told you this many times, regardless of the fact that technically he's old enough to consent, a teacher and a student can't have a relationship because that's considered, well, a teacher is considered someone in a position of trust. So there's an arraignment. It's scheduled for December 19th of 2025, upcoming. As a matter of fact, as I'm recording this, it's December 19th of 2025. So an arraignment was scheduled for today. I haven't seen anything on it yet, so I'll update you on that the next time I come on the air. But as of this recording, it should be going on. But a pretty shocking case there in a situation where there's a big gray line because he was 17. Not that that's okay for a 30-year-old to be chasing a 17-year-old, but he was of the age of consent. Regardless of that, she's a teacher. She can't do that. It's illegal. So I'll keep you posted. And I'm going to move on to another case of a bad teacher, and this one's a little bit different than what you're typically used to with me because, number one, this victim has identified himself, and he wanted to be identified. He is wanting to raise awareness for how much of a problem this is. He's actually gone on several news shows and discussed what he's went through, and he's really advocating for more of a tightening, if you will, of these discrepancies between these female teachers and male students versus male teachers and female students and the sentences they get and how it's perceived from society. And so let's talk about Nicole Callaham. And Nicole Callaham is a 33-year-old former kindergarten teacher in Anderson County, South Carolina. And before, everybody freaks out because I said the word kindergarten there, she didn't have a relationship with a kindergartner. She was a teacher, but this was not her student. However, it's really disturbing what she did, and we're going to cover it. So she is facing current multiple felony charges across 3 different jurisdictions in South Carolina for allegedly grooming and sexually abusing a teenage boy starting when he was just 14 years old. Now, the abuse itself reportedly spanned at least 2 years, beginning in 2021. And it involves patterns you would expect, including manipulation, providing the victim with alcohol, marijuana, nicotine, and it leads to this former kindergarten teacher engaging in sexual acts with this kid in locations such as Greenville, South Carolina, hotels, and even a parking garage. Now, the victim in this case at this point in time is 18. And as I told you, he came forward shortly after his 18th birthday, which was in May of 2025. He reported all of this shit, and that in turn triggered investigations, and a lot of evidence was uncovered as a result of this. And as of now, this is an active case, and it's had some pretty shocking twists and turns along the way that we'll get into. But I'm going to give you a timeline again in the background on this case. And we're going to start in 2017 when Callaham begins working as a kindergarten teacher. Now, this is at Homeland Park Primary School, and it's in what's known as the Anderson School District, and that's located in South Carolina. And she taught there until her resignation from that school. And I'll tell you when she resigned in just a second. But let's talk about 2021 because Callaham meets Strickland, and she meets this kid through what's known as a project called the Challenge Playhouse, which is a community theater group where she served as director of musical theater operations. Now, Strickland aspired to become an actor, and he auditioned for it, and he actually landed the lead role in a production of Legally Blonde. If you'll remember that movie, Legally Blonde, this was a musical production based off of that movie, and he lands the lead male role. And that kind of enabled this relationship to start, because they would spend a lot of time together and they would get very close. As a matter of fact, Strickland would later describe her as his best friend. And he wouldn't even call her Miss Callaham. He would call her Nikki. And authorities allege that's where the grooming really started. And I would tend to agree with that. You see a lot of this with these cases where teachers start exploiting their roles to build trust with victims. So that was in 2021. And from 2021 to 2023, the alleged abuse continues. Now, Strickland was a minor at the time. He was 14 when they started working on this play together. And from the ages of 14 to 16, some really despicable things occurred. For example, Callaham, who did not teach, incidentally, at Strickland's school, he actually attended a school in Greenville County, but she would sign him out of his school without permission and then drive him to practices and events and supervise school activities for these kids. And they would communicate all the time via social media, even after his family asked her to quit communicating with him on social media. As a matter of fact, when she was charged with all this, meaning Callaham, the victim's mother would later state in court, quote, "We truly thought she believed in our son's talent, and looking back, it sickens me to know that she manipulated our son and our family." So the parents in this case, they thought all of this hanging out and things they were doing together were all to improve her son's acting skills, which obviously couldn't be any further from the truth. Now, all of that occurred from 2021 to 2023. And in May of 2024, an initial investigation started. And there's not a whole lot of information on what started that initial investigation, but a year later, in May of 2025, Callaham resigns from the Homeland Park Primary School. Now, just prior to her resignation, Strickland, he had turned 18, and that's when he went forward to authorities. So the reason she resigned is obviously because he had already went to police with this past relationship that he had with her over years, and she knew it. So July 10th of 2025, Callaham, she voluntarily surrenders to the Anderson County Detention Center, and the next day she gets a bond, and her bond is set at $40,000 with a no contact order with the victim's family. And that's typical in any case such as this. Now, it's important to remember there are 3 counties in play here. So these inappropriate things went on in 3 separate counties, and so she's facing charges in 3 separate counties. So although she may bond in what's known as Anderson County, the very next day she had a bond hearing in what's known as Greenville County. And the judge in this case, he wasn't, I guess, as nice as the judge in the other case, and he was really on the fence as to whether he was even going to give her bond. Then, shockingly, her attorney announces, middle of court, that Callaham is pregnant, which factors into the decision to grant her bond. Now, she had a lot of prenatal appointments and things like that. Her defense brought all that up, her attorney, and said all this stuff was scheduled very soon. And I know we're all thinking, after what she did, who cares about all that? But it's our system in this country. You're innocent until proven guilty. And I guess the judge in this matter, everyone has the right to a bond unless they're considered a flight risk or they're like a mass murderer. So the judge decides he would grant the bond. And the bond is set pretty low, $10,000 per charge. However, she had several charges, 12 separate charges in that county. So that's a $120,000 bond she had to make in that county, which she does, and she gets released. So from there, on July 21st of 2025, a formal indictment is filed, and just 10 days later, the South Carolina Board of Education, they suspend her teaching certificate. And then a little time passes until August 13th, which is about 3 weeks later. In the Clemson City Police Department, they confirmed that they have an ongoing investigation in their jurisdiction against her. And guess what? She gets arrested in Clemson City. And this is on August 25th of 2025 on additional charges, all related to this minor, who is now an adult. And she gets a $65,000 bond in that case, and she posts bond again. Now, I don't know where she's getting all this money from, but she posts that bond and she's released as of now, and there's no further updates on this case, but I want to cover with you the charges quickly. In Anderson County, South Carolina, 3 counts of criminal sexual conduct with a minor and 1 count of contributing to the delinquency of a minor. I would imagine that's the alcohol offer she gave. In Greenville County, she had 8 counts of criminal sexual conduct with a minor who is under 16 and 4 counts of unlawful conduct toward a child under 16 and an additional 5 counts of unlawfully placing a child at risk of harm. That's where she posted the $120,000 bond. And then finally, in Clemson County, South Carolina, she had 1 count of first-degree criminal sexual conduct, 1 count of second-degree, same charge, but child under 16, and 2 counts of contributing to the delinquency of a minor. So all told, in these 3 jurisdictions, she had to post bonds in excess of $225,000. And she was able to do it. Now, it's important also to mention she was married at the point that all this was going on, this sexual stuff with this kid. However, by the time she got arrested, she was not married. She did finalize for divorce. This was in late 2024, so she's no longer married. She's also pregnant, as I mentioned, and she's got a mess that she's dealing with in addition to this pregnancy. And the pregnancy is allegedly with a boyfriend, not with this kid. Now, as I told you, the victim in this case, he's advocating, and he spoke publicly several times. And he's quoted as saying, "I have had to grow up very fast and get a whole new maturity level that I was not ready for and should not have to have had been ready for. It happens a lot, and it's not just the women, it's men too. And it happens to young children. It has got to stop because I was a child. I was not a man. I was a boy." And his mother also was quoted as saying she leads a double life as a mentor of young, impressionable children, kindergarten teacher, and mother of a little girl trying to get through an unfair season in her life, but in reality, she is sick and twisted and calculated and is a sex offender. And yes, I did say mother of a little girl just a second ago because she does currently have a little girl, so she's pregnant with her second child. Now, in the case of her child that she currently has, the child is 5 years old, and since this has all come out, she's actually fighting her ex-husband for custody of that child. Just a bizarre case going down in South Carolina. And why would you risk all that for this 14-year-old kid? I will never understand. So as I said, I'm going to give you the trifecta today and cover just one more case of a bad teacher for you. And this is another case where it was just years of sexual relationship with a student. And I haven't seen many cases like this one. It's just horrible. I'm going to tell you the story of Laura Caron, who is a former 5th grade teacher at Middle Township Elementary School. This is in Cape May County, New Jersey. She was arrested in 2025 on charges of sexually assaulting, get ready for this, an 11-year-old male student. Now, if that's not disgusting enough, it gets worse. The abuse allegedly spanned for years and resulted in Laura Caron giving birth to a child fathered by the boy when he was just 13. So strap in for this one. Now, obviously, this case has drawn some national attention, and prosecutors brought charges in this case that they describe as a pattern of repeated sexual assaults, which they estimate as 416 different instances. So Caron has pleaded not guilty, which you expect. Everybody pleads not guilty. In an arraignment, you have nothing to lose when you do that. And in this case, another shocking thing is the alleged victim has publicly come out and defended her. And obviously there's no defense for sexually assaulting an 11-year-old, but this victim came out and said that he initiated the relationship, which, okay, he's young kid, a child. He doesn't understand that. And the law doesn't care who initiates it. The adult's responsible. We all know that, but it's pretty interesting nonetheless that this victim comes out defending her. So the allegations here surfaced in very late of 2024, where a social media post by the victim's father and an anonymous tip to school officials lead to an investigation into some claims here of an inappropriate relationship. Now, once this investigation started, Caron gets placed on administrative leave, and as almost always happens in these cases, she was removed from her position. So a little background on this, and I'm going to take you back to 2016. And Caron at this point was a 26-year-old teacher. She taught 5th grade at Middle Township Elementary School in New Jersey. Very attractive teacher. And the alleged victim and his older brother, they were students in her class during the 2015-2016 school year. And Caron befriends the victim's mother in this case. And it's through that friendship that allegedly the mother would allow her children to stay overnight at Caron's home. And this was looked at as Caron doing this lady a favor. Apparently, the victim's mother, she had some sort of job where she worked nights, a couple of nights a week, and it would become kind of a normal thing that a couple of days, nights a week, Karen would watch these kids overnight for the victim's mother. By 2016, somehow this becomes a full-time thing, and Karen starts taking them to school and providing them gifts, which is a major grooming technique, gift buying. Almost all cases where a young person is being groomed, gift giving is involved. Now, right now, there's nothing that I can find that kind of speaks to how the parents could allow what would become almost a guardianship and why the parents would allow that. But it is what it is, and that's what occurred. And by 2016, these kids were staying almost full time with this teacher. Now, the mother was asked somewhat of the relationship between her and Karen, and she was quoted as describing it later that it was a helpful friendship, whatever that means. Now, at this point in time, one thing I'll say, although I would never, when my kids were teenagers, let them stay at a teacher's house for one night. Hell, I didn't let them spend the night at people's house much. It may happen once or twice. But a teacher's house? No way. Not even for one night. This was extended to all the time. It just blows my mind. I have no idea what led to that. But that being said, what's even more bizarre is that this teacher did not have any sort of criminal record. As a matter of fact, her record was spotless. She had a stable family upbringing. She was a successful teacher. She was not married. She lived alone. And she wasn't perceived as like a partier or anything like that. So it would seem really out of character for these 416 instances of sex she had with this victim. So let's go over the timeline. As I said, 2015 to 2016, the victim at this time was 11 years old. He was in Karen's 5th grade class. She forms a close relationship with the mother, and that leads to those initial sleepovers at her house. In 2016, the sleepovers become what's described as permanent, with the victim sleeping in Karen's bed instead of a guest bedroom that she had. And this is where the alleged sexual abuse started, with prosecutors saying that Karen groomed the victim with gifts, attention, isolation, and common grooming techniques there, right? Then from 2016 to 2020, the relationship continued, allegedly with sexual contact occurring twice a week, every week, for 4 fucking years. And that's where they get those 416 instances of sexual abuse from.
Jim, did you see what happened in Texas today?
Wait, before you tell me that, let me tell you what happened in New York.
It cannot be as crazy as the case I told you about yesterday in Louisiana.
You know what? We should do a podcast about it.
And with that, we did. Crime Wire Weekly covers the crime news headlines that have dominated the week.
We cover trending crimes from all over the country and even sprinkle in a few globally.
Crime Wire Weekly is available now wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Simply by searching Crime Wire Weekly or clicking the link in the description of this podcast. And the prosecution even has witnesses that report Karen would enter the bathroom while the boys showered, lock the door, and then emerge out of the bathroom being wrapped in a towel, and the boy also being wrapped in a towel. And the witness to this incident, who witnessed it? Because I haven't mentioned this yet. Guess who also stayed with this sick teacher? How about the boy's sister? Sickening, right? Now, in 2019 is when the biggest shocker of all comes, and that's when Karen gives birth to a son who both the prosecutors and the victim's family allege was fathered by, at this time, the 13-year-old victim. And it's at this point the boy permanently moves his clothes into Karen's bedroom. So on December 12th of 2024, that is when all the shit hits the fan. When the victim's father, he posts a Facebook post, and he notes the uncanny resemblance between Karen's 5-year-old son. So this kid at this point, not the victim, but the kid she allegedly had with the victim was 5. He notes the resemblance between that boy and his own son. Now, he knew what he was doing when he posted that. He did it intentionally, right? So on December 16th, just 3 days later, the victim's sister reported to police that she had seen inappropriate behavior, including that bathroom incident that I mentioned and the boy in Karen's bed every night. So get this, the same day, another thing I didn't mention, the younger brother also lived at the house, and he was 8 years old in 2024, and he disclosed witnessing molestation on a recliner under a blanket during a movie they were all watching together. Then, just a couple of weeks after that, in late December of 2024, on an anonymous tip line received by the school's superintendent, there was a message saying that Karen and this student were having a sexual relationship. And the victim's mother, she also contacted law enforcement after receiving a text from her son admitting that Karen's baby is also his baby. So there had to have been a conversation there of some sort, and he admitted to it. So a couple of weeks after that, on January 15th of 2025, Karen gets arrested at her home and she gets placed on administrative leave by the school. And the interesting thing about this is January 21st, she has her bond hearing and she's denied bond. They held her, which I would imagine the primary reason for that was the relationship started when this kid was 11 freaking years old. Disgusting. And remember, I told you at the beginning of this one, this kid is sticking up for her, saying even at 11 years old, he initiated all of this, which is mind-blowing to me. So by the end of January, she gets arrested and everything starts moving quickly, right? Y'all know this is the most frustrating thing for me. Of course, I'm being facetious. Nothing moves quickly in the court system. And as of this recording, there is no information on even when this case is going to trial. Now, the last thing that I read on this, there were some things slowing it up, such as mental health evaluations, which take forever, but it's frustrating nonetheless. Now, the charges that this individual is facing: first-degree aggravated assault for acts with the victim under 13. Now, those charges, you're going to get 10 to 20 years in New Jersey for that. Second-degree sexual assault, 5 to 10 years for that. Second degree endangering the welfare of a child, you're going to get 5 to 10 years for that. So if Laura Caron gets convicted of all these charges, she could be facing up to 40 years in prison. And because this victim was younger than 13, there are mandatory minimums in place for that first degree aggravated sexual assault charge. So she pleads guilty to that. She's going to have to serve at least 10 years. What scares me in this case, as you know, how they love to plea bargain these things down. I hope this doesn't happen in this case. It ought to be illegal, in my opinion, to plea bargain the rape of an 11-year-old, which is exactly what this is. But I'm going to tell you what, one of the most disturbing cases I've covered on Bad Teachers thus far, I hope she gets everything she deserves as far as a sentence. And that's all I got for you today. Thank you so much for listening. Check out the Patreon. I'm going to show pictures of all 3 of the bad teachers that I discussed today on the Patreon, plus some files and things like that. I'll even upload that affidavit for you on the Patreon page. And look, before I get out of here, I need your ratings on Apple Podcasts, especially if you listen on that particular platform. But wherever you listen, if there's a way to rate about what you think, if you're enjoying the content and you'd like to rate us, please consider doing so. It costs you nothing and it sure helps me out. Thank you so much. Shout out to my Patrons. Could not do this without you. Your support is, I can't even come up with an adjective to describe how important it is. Thank you so much. And until next time, for Exposed Scandalous Files of the Elite, I'm your host, Jim Chapman. Much love.